yeah, well, it's produced in Armenia with the help of UNDP, let's say. And what the authors are trying to do in their paper is to present kind of new measure or modified measure of sustainability based on the existing HDI index. So they call it Sustainable Human Development Index. It's the composition of SHDI, the Sustainable Human Development Index, has two steps. The first is the composition of EHDI, Environmental HDI, which simply incorporates the fourth dimension to the traditional HDI, which is environmental dimension. And then they try to penalize all four dimensions of adjusted HDI, adjusted by environment, I mean. They try to penalize it in order to measure sustainability. So the difference between not penalized HDI and penalized will be how much the country loses due to unsustainability in all four dimensions.
So basically, the EHDI just brings the environment in, and the SHDI tries to measure sustainability according to these four components. So this would be the two steps in order to get to the index and basically the novelty of the Armenian system. And one of the first criticisms is that they define in the paper, and maybe it's just a conceptual criticism, but maybe it also has practical implications. We can't yet establish that, but they define the sustainability, or what they're trying to measure with SHDI, as the ability to sustain, which from our point of view could lead to maintaining a bad status. Like we have a rankings, we have some points allocated to the countries, and then let's say a country gets on position 5 with a number of problems. Next year it's also number 5, next year is also number 5, just because it maintains, it has the ability to sustain the current system. But that doesn't mean that there shouldn't be improvements. I mean, there is space for improvement all the time. And if you think about sustainable human development, it means enhancing capabilities and constantly developing for the better. So this definition, I mean, perhaps if we implement this index and if we start using it on a large scale, on a global scale, it might push countries to just maintain, in order to get to the right points, just maintain the status and not improve. Then we had a problem with the minimum and maximum, the range.
Yeah. Well, I can explain, yes. So, TRB is actually the one of the components of social dimension of SHDI, and it reflects for Armenian case the minimum and maximum within disability adjusted life years for 1,000 persons. So we just curious and couldn't understand this minimum 13 and maximum around 300. It's for Armenia, but then the author on the other page he made a rank of like around 20 countries. Does the author change this minimum or maximum according to the number? It's like an average index, because, or if it will be, for example, 26 countries, it will be again another one. So just there is no explanation in how you actually calculate this.
Thanks. Can I add, in addition, is it also a minimum and maximum on observation of 1 year, or on a, let's say, last 10 years, or what?
Each year.
And how is going to change every year, or is going to be the same?
Yeah, the time frame is unclear, and how they're going to change from year to year, taking into account more countries, is very unclear.
And if we are to use the globally calculated values, we don't have one for the environment, so that's another issue that we don't know how we would solve, or we don't have ranges for that particular fourth component, and that's another open question.
In the beginning of the paper, when the authors try to explain their concept and the idea behind the new index, they say that one of the things that they will try to achieve in in their paper is to overcome the limitation of the traditional HDI, which is mixing together, putting together inputs and outputs. But then at the end of the paper, they admit that actually they have not managed to overcome these achievements the way they wanted. So in a sense, not all the goals of the paper achieved.
Then we have a situation with tier C, which we haven't mentioned at the beginning. We mentioned tier A with the environmental component and tier B with the sustainability. Tier C proposes some context background information as far as we understood, but it's very unclear what we do with that information. I mean, there's no measurement for it, for these indicators. They say at some point that it's almost impossible to measure it. It's, for example, private expenditure on health, or quality of education, or dependency on remittances, or major convention ratifications. And if they say that it's almost impossible to measure it, which for us it tells that they will not measure it, we don't really see what's the point of having this background information. But among ourselves, we disagreed with this argument, because some people said that it's good to have them, and it's good to ask the countries to kind of provide data on these indices, because this is how we would actually develop and acquire more and more and more data and more qualitative information. But on the other hand, it could complicate the process of data collecting and the actual final ranking and measurements, I think.
But I think the problem is that this tier C does not take part in the calculation of the index. That's the major problem. They say that
should it be?
Yes, they say that the broader context of sustainable development, political and institutional, has obvious implications for human development, but then they do not incorporate these dimensions into the SHDI. So, and the question is, why do we actually need it then, if the purpose is to construct an index? So that's also a bit.
Also, the problem was whether there are some components that exist in this index, and whether there is a need to put this as a separate index, like it's going to be also as a repetition for.
Or just simply data collection as background information,
which is probably good, but not related to the purpose. So that's how we can criticize.
And then this index tries or should address some of the limitations of the Human Development Index. And again, we had a debate here, but I'm going to let Vlad explain.
Yeah, so here there are other two bullets, other two questions for group A. So the first one, actually it's a quotation of the famous economist Posner in his, I found it in his blog. So the first problem, another problem associated with the index is the general problem of ranking. So he says, the distance between the ranks is more important than the number of ranks that separate two countries. So for example, if we have country number 1 and country number 20, yeah, there is a gap of 20, the number of ranks between them is 20, but maybe the life expectancy between them falls only by, I don't know, 2 years. Then it's not trivial, it's not a big deal. But if you compare country number 20 with country number 40, again, it's the same drop in number of countries, but the drop in life expectancy can be 10 years. So what are we interested, first of all, not in the rank of the country, but in the distance between the ranks, and the distance between life expectancy and other things. The problem with SHDI that it's a table, it's a rank. So we see the first country, the second, the third one, and it can be misleading. It can be misleading. So the question to group A is how to avoid that it's misleading. Yeah, this is the one question. Another question is about calculation formula. So SHDI has the following formula. Yep. So how do we call it in English? The 4th grade root. Yes. And we have here health times knowledge times GDP times environment. Yeah.
And all these are indexes.
And all these are indexes. Yeah. So
and also there is penalty for non-sustainability. What you wrote is EHDI.
Okay, yeah. So each thing, each component is ranked between 0 and 100, or 0 and 1? Okay, 0 and 1. Then let me give you example. Country A can have health, let it be 0.7, knowledge 0.6, GDP 0.5, and environment 0.5. Actually 0.4. Yeah. And another country has health of 0.4, knowledge of 0.7. So look what happens. Health is 0.4, knowledge is 0.7, GDP is the same 0.5, and environment is the same 0.5. So it's obvious that if we use this formula, this equation, the results will be the same. But the question for group A, and let them answer this question, which country is more sustainable, more development, the sick one or the stupid one?
That's it. Thank you.
Okay. Good. Thank you very much. On behalf of the team working on this index, I can tell you that you have done a great job. You could have been much more smashing, I would say. Shall we move to the group 3 or C or first respond? Let's briefly respond on a few issues. I will start and Mikhail will follow. Actually, it's indeed very good comments. It's not just about having some index. The purpose of this was to develop the thinking in the direction of human development and sustainability. I agree, maybe it's a little bit not quite clear definition of how do we define sustainability in terms of ability to sustain, not sustain the status, but sustain the achievements. So, but relevant point, if achievements are bad or insufficient, how do we move from better achievement? But also, the idea behind this was to what extent the achievements are achieved in a sustainable way. And that's why the second tier of the index. The third tier of the index was not supposed to provide additional calculation and additional indices. So we don't think it is possible to include the entire universe in one index. And the third tier was, by definition, supposed to help the analysis and contextualize these results which are captured in the index. But also relevant point, hopefully it will continue, will encourage additional data production and the research at country level. And also this third tier was seen as a way of, in which we can bring the globally comparable, originally being in terms of BRIC regions, comparable indicators like this SHTI close to the country context. We also always have this choice between global comparability and national adequacy. So bringing the context in with additional analytical tier could be, we thought, one of the possible options. But obviously he didn't like it, so we have to rethink about it, rethink it. The minimum and maximum values, we were generally following the existing human development index methodology to the extent possible.
No, for disability adjusted, it was minimum observable, minimum maximum for data we had for global data. I think 300 something, it was something like Chad, and 16 was something like Netherlands.
And this is the same logic which the Global Human Development Report Office is using to follow observable minimum and maximum. So simply we apply the same logic to the
but they use it for the whole rank of countries, and you in this table you just use like 20.
No, you have table only for these countries.
Okay.
But the minimum and the maximum were for the.
But data were collected and calculation were done for all countries in the world.
It's not like if you look, you cannot understand. You just.
I think that is for Armenia, for
the input-outcome dichotomy. Of course, we could not achieve it as we would like to, but at least we hope that it is important to mark that an issue exists, and there was an attempt to bring it a little bit closer to the outcome level. Of course, we have limitations in that regard. And one of the limitations is that we did not want to entirely reconstruct the Human Development Index and have something totally new. So there is a space in which you can achieve something in the existing framework and not provoke too much questions and why do we make revolutions like that and so on. So this is
okay. Okay, a couple of points. One thing about ranks, completely right observation, but completely wrong, because we never focus on ranking. You have this table with different countries, but it's mostly for demonstrative purposes. What we, and I think you had this printout, when we constructed how we will visualize this, we pay specific attention to this. So we made this kind of chart. On horizontal axis, we have sustainable human development index. On this vertical axis, we have environmental human development index. So your country could be quite developed, but if your sustainable human development index, i.e., penalized for non-sustainability, you will get something like that. Ideally, you should have a square. If you have full sustainability, it will be square. EHDI is equal to SHDI, right? But if you have huge penalty, you have something like this. If you have less developed country, but more sustainable, it will be like square. And I think I intentionally printed you 3 countries. In handouts it was Armenia, Bosnia, and Ukraine. And Ukraine is very interesting case because Ukraine lost a lot due to penalty in economic factor. And if you look on this penalty, it's coming from 2 sources. One is CO2 emission and second is energy inefficiency. Okay? So that could be points you could discuss a little bit more.
Enough.
And no, one more point. This stupid and sick. That's a very valid question which will appear to any index which making average. What is more relevant here? That we're making a geometric mean of all these things, which mean economic penalty for non-sustainability penalize all other components. And that was a question for us. Should we go this way? Because you could have economic non-sustainability, which will penalize a whole range of things. Maybe you could discuss if it could be better approach to penalize them separately and then do average arithmetic. Okay, so that's all.
Okay, thank you very much. Group C, the other paper analysis.
Yes. So the group C, we had very vivid discussion on the paper Sustainability and Human Development, a proposal for a sustainability adjusted HDI by Jose Pineda. And what we would like to attract your attention is sustainability adjusted, not environmental adjusted. This will be very important. So let's call our criticism, we divided in 2 parts: content analysis and statistical analysis. So in content analysis, we found a few things that, from our point of view, made quite misunderstand what actually is the purpose of this article and paper. Because at the first page it was mentioned, the idea of this paper is to propose a sustainability adjusted HDI in which countries' achievements in human development are penalized to reflect overexploitation of the environment and its intensity. So somehow we have 2 points: that weak sustainability towards strong sustainability, and put the risk of understanding what it was meant, because it actually was not very explained. And although it's supposed to propose one adjusted, sustainability adjusted index, what is proposed, it was environmental pillar was only analyzed, because the penalization was based on 3 concepts. It was CO2 emissions, fresh water, and deforestation. Even not mentioning energy or things related with the environment, but at any point there were no concept of social aspect, none at all. Friendly institutions or social environment, and no concept at all from economical point of view. So, and besides this, that we missed that two pillars, so it means that that nice chair with three stools is just fell down. 3 legs just fell down. Thank you. So it's from our point, it doesn't go anywhere. Then in the paper we missed a lot of reasoning, and many of us were pointing on this point that it's argument after some example comes from previous studies, but actually no reason why it was chosen, for example, these 3 particular pillars of environment, or only why sustainability means only environment. So we just didn't find that at any point. And from a methodology point of view, also there was penalty function was not really explained. It was penalty function, so what? We penalize, but how we penalize, what the effect we attempt to achieve with this, and what the outcome, what the policy proposal of something. It was just we penalize. So at the end, it was that we actually didn't find any conclusion how this sustainability adjusted HDI would function and what are potential outcomes. And many of us mentioned that actually that when you hear the point of penalty or penalize, so then you think, does the country should take some measures and decide, well, if you're going to be penalized for having high HDI, why then we should grow and develop further. So maybe at the end they will lack incentives to do so. This is also will be mentioned here in statistical analysis. So passing on our second point of statistical analysis, it made us a lot of to smile, if I may say it so directly, that actually discrete data was used and source of all data was own calculations. Based on what data, which came from where, it was not clear at all. Then lack of concrete examples and clarifications. In several parts of the paper it was mentioned incentive parameters of intensity, some indicators, but what is meant in concrete that idea, or to give some examples for reader to be able to follow better, like by indicators such as or things like this, there was a dismiss. Then from what we missed also, although at the end of the paper there were several calculations, some tables provided, some more, some less, but actually how countries were selected. Although it was written, just to be correct, top rank position losses with the as HDI, all indicators are based on fresh water or something, but actually why particularly these were collected. It's just they're lost, but what's behind? And again about unreliability of source, so if we are making some adjustment about unreliable sources, so about what parameters and indicators we can produce out of it, and finally lack of actually for countries incentives to aim for higher HDI. So it was our conclusion overall that we lacked. So thank you very much.
Comments, questions? Jose is not here, so he cannot respond to the criticism, but other questions on this?
One more time explain this system of penalizing, just like you asked, because it's still not clear.
basically, the idea behind both methodologies is that you should somehow reflect the way you have achieved a certain level of development and a certain level of human development. So in the first presented methodology, there was this second tier. In the second methodology, it was just discounting the value of the HDI for negative environmental implications. So with the assumption that non-environmentally friendly development path results in the long run in a non-sustainable development outcomes, and this should be reflected in the ranking and the value of HDI. So that's basically the logic. The lower the magnitude of this penalty, the better, more closer to sustainable development path is the actual country's performance.
In group C, with Armenian case, you should get this diamond diagram, right? And blue, which is darker, this blue diamond, which is bigger and darker, it's EHDI, right?
Yeah.
And green is smaller, it's sustainability adjusted HDI. I mean components of this.
So each of the components of the Human Development Index are.
And for instance, you could see for Bosnia, I think they have very heavy penalty on education, which is not case in Ukraine and Armenia. And in Armenia, contrary, they have very high penalty on economics because we penalize it for CO2 emission and energy inefficiency. So that's penalization. Yes.
From this diagram, see the range of penalty.
How far?
In Ukraine, education is higher.
How far it's from more dark?
Okay, maybe let's move to the third group, or the first, which will present the new ideas, and we can come back to the discussion, somehow reconciling all approaches and doing something totally new and better. Did you present it? No.
Red group.
Yeah, ladies and red group.
Okay. Not sure if it's completely visible, but we will explain it.
Okay, clearly we did not have any paper to critique and crash, so no, it's not me. I'll speak. We had to work on the Sustainable Human Development Index, and clearly for that we had considered certain domains: health, education, quality of life, with inclusive of economy, environment, social ties and capital, social capital as in, and governance. These were our 6 sectors or domains which we had considered for the Sustainable Human Development Index. After a lot of debate, we had kept social setup separately because it was getting very complicated, because social setup, every place has its own factors which we did not want to include in this. So social setup we have completely kept separate: health, education, quality of life, including economy, environment, social ties and governance. These were our 6 domains, within which we have, I would detail on the indicators that we have kept. Health we have kept at an individual level, physical and mental, and access to healthcare, basic healthcare facilities. For education, it is access to education and the rate of completion of education in terms of dropout rates, because there are many students who actually enter nursery or KG levels and do not finish the 12th standard. So the rate of completion. Again, here we had a debate on equality access, because we have males and female gender, and female gender does not get the equal opportunities, but it's not restricted only to education sector. So we have again kept that separately.
We have quality of life with respect to economy. We have kept income, happiness. Can we afford a two-week family trip outside as an indicator, and life expectancy? Yeah, that is an important indicator. It shows the family ties as well as the quality of life. For social ties, we have trust in people. I do not know what is written here. What was the second one?
Participation in social life, access to communal reserves,
and social inclusion.
And social inclusion we put as a separate kind of block because we had limited time and we cannot quickly come out with indicators of social inclusion.
Governance, we had transparency, public participation, capacity building, scope for capacity building, political stability, and availability of, I do not know what is the first point. Availability of
scope for capacity building.
Scope for capacity building, transparency, and public participation were the three indicators which we kept for governance. And then we gave the sustainability index, which my colleague will explain after the procedure.
Okay, and these were all about the domain, and let's call them the domain for each important cluster. But then question arises how we can measure sustainability, and we decided to make a separate layer under each relevant cluster. And sometimes use the if-then formula. And for health domain, we decided that
percent of people who can get.
Yeah, exactly. So we should use the percent of people having access to healthcare system.
But it's not, we had a lot of discussions, and it's not infrastructural indicators like having hospital. That's coming from lower level, asking people during last time when you have a need to get to the doctor, did you manage to get the services or not? Because we had a number of examples where there is hospital but no staff and so on and so forth. And also, I think it's in the corner, this blue spot is quality. We had a lot of debates on quality of the services, but we cannot come out with a good indicator.
Yes, on education domain, we propose that we should use the percentage of students, pupils that have completed their education. On quality of life, including the economic development, it was much said about the debt. So the debt is a core element that can shape the stability of economic development. And we consider it useful to use the indicator of debt for this domain. Concerning the environmental domain, we think that it will be important to use CO2 emission as an impact on environment, but there came a question. What will be the benchmark for if-then formula? Let's see if we have just one threshold, or let's call it benchmark, of the CO2 emissions increase. So what if 1% of CO2 emission, what if CO2 emission is just 1% more? How we can say that this country is sustainable in terms of environmental stability or not? Then we decided to use two thresholds, and if CO2 emission is here, so it doesn't go beyond the threshold, then the country is absolutely sustainable in terms of environment. And if no, so we can see on another benchmark or threshold. In this example, the country considered to be highly unsustainable in terms of environment. And for social domain, we consider that inequality can be an important indicator. As for the governance, it was said that corruption was also an indicator, and maybe my colleague can elaborate more.
And we had also in discussion how we could look on sustainability.
While looking for the relevance of our model, for example, in inputs, we get outputs, the outcome, and the impact. We are seeking for the relevance and ability to convert our model into reality. For example, for the inputs, if we use quality of life, quality of healthcare here. Quality of healthcare, the outcome could help in better rates of completion, education completion. Which in a way, there are some gains, there are wastages could be reduced. Because when people are not healthy, they don't attend schools. Then instead, if you improve the health system, the resources spent on education will be better used. So there is a reduction here in wastage of resources. Then, in the improved outcome, the outcome will have improved income of better educated people, which equally leads to improved quality of life. Then the improved income and improved quality of life, the impact will be economic growth. Economic growth. And link it back here, reinvestment of capital. A little bit of reinvestment. Then we move down to another scenario where you have quality education to test the sustainability. Then you have the gains. Better opportunity for women. Then if women get better educated, then reduction in population. Then reduced use of resources, of natural resources. Then you have a kind of reinvestment again. Then from here, you have better management of the resources we have available. So there is a linkage between education and reduction. There is a linkage with gain. So for to show the reliability and validity of our model, we could use this. If it's able to convert into this, that means that the model is sustainable. Or whatever option choices people make should be something that will be converted, like this. Makes sense.
Questions before I ask my questions?
Some comments.
Please. Comments, questions.
What's the governance structure? Probably in that, instead of transparency, you can use accountability, which is a broader, which would be a broader governance mechanism where transparency would be a part of it, and which would also include probably information to be disseminated in the governance structure. And when you're talking about the governance structure, do you just look at the way the government is working or the political parties are working, or
civil society actors would also be there. So that would come here, and the third aspect is, it's a very hypothetical thing that if there's better education, there will be reduced resources, because as we have seen that consumerism has expanded because people are more exposed to technology. I would be like, I have a BlackBerry, I would want an iPhone. On the other hand, when you see the traditional ways of how people are living in villages, they make the best use of resources. Like in our area, people might use cow dung as manure, as well as energy producing. So here, would there be a need of regulatory mechanisms to ensure that education would be such that it helps in reduction of population, helps in better utilization of resources, so on and so forth? Just two things.
Okay.
I have several points which I was sort of making while we were listening to this presentation. First of all, I would like to really say something good about the conceptual diagram that was presented by the last team. I really like those linkages that you were developing and the feedback groups, and I think this might be a wonderful way forward to really go into these cross-sectoral linkages. And the points I wanted to make really are limited to the following 5. Very simple things. The issue that we probably the issue that is getting somehow neglected to my mind in both of these papers is the so-called question. Oh, you can't see it.
You close the computer. The projector.
Okay. So is the question of incommensurability of values. The fact that you are measuring different phenomena using different scales, partly this problem is addressed by using this type of route. But I would probably have to say that I agree with the formulation presented here, that the methodology as it is presented now would fail to differentiate between cases which really stand very, very far apart from each other. So if you can look at this from the point of view of multi-criteria decision aid, and this is also the case of multi-criteria decision aid. If you remember, I mentioned the 4 different types of structures that emerge out of this process. So the first is the description of the problem. This is what has been done in this session. Second, there is a problem of assignment to a particular category. And you might imagine, let's say, 100 different positions for all periods you can imagine for all countries of the world. You can define these 100 ranges from the point of view of all criteria, and then on the basis of a certain multi-criteria decision aid program, you would assign each to this particular category. So assignment to categories. Then there is the selection of a non-dominated core, which is not really applicable because we're not really looking for the winner or several winners, but it's still there. So selection of a small subset, non-dominated. And finally, it's the ranking. But the trick is that in quite a few multi-criteria decision aid tools and methods, especially those that are of the outranking type. This ranking is not necessarily a straight line, but could be seen as a web of domination relationships. So imagine you've got a very simple case of 3 countries and 3 criteria. So saying GDP per capita, CO2 emissions, and life expectancy. And you've got country A, B, and C. And GDP for country A is, let's say, $15,000. For country B, $30,000. And for country C, $40,000. CO2 emissions for country A are 2,000 kilograms per person per year. For country B, 3,000. For country C, 1,000. And life expectancy is 70 years, 80 years, and 82 years. Well, this one you want to maximize, this one you want to minimize, and this one to maximize. The result appears to look like as follows. So, and here is the difference of what this type of methodology could tell you in comparison with this. So you're not, you're able to see where there is a case of incomparability. You will not be hidden in the numbers, because this way you wouldn't notice if you were not looking specifically. This way you could notice it straight away. So that's one thing. And then also two issues which are sort of more of a technical nature really, which are the following. When we talk about these huge panels of indicators, one thing we have to bear in mind is that selecting a pool is a decision with some sort of consequences and maybe some thought process behind it. And the question is, would we like to sort of assemble our basket of indicators in such a way that economic, environmental, and social would be represented in a sort of an equal proportion? Or, you know, there is some kind of alternative rationale behind it, or we want to have as many indicators as possible and give each and every one an equal weight, you know. So it is a space which, you know, not very many people gave answers to so far. And of course, finally, there is an issue of data, because as well, one could wish, we would like to have all this data for all possible years, for all possible countries. But it happens so that some data is only available for certain years, so it will be good for cross-country comparisons. And sometimes it's, I don't know, 2005 or 1990 or something like this, especially less developed countries, or such exotic things as distribution of incomes in the form of you know, Gini coefficient. Whereas some very sort of easily obtainable numbers will be available for you know, the majority of countries, such as those probably that were behind the original Human Development Index. You know, the measures of economic progress, some health measures, you know, and those things. But I'm just trying to suggest that we should discuss these issues. So the indivisibility of values, the fact that you could explicitly acknowledge the incomparabilities between various objects, and how to balance this basket. Thank you.
Thank you. More comments? More questions?
I could comment on baskets, and we explicitly did it in Armenia. Because when we start looking on a regional proposal, we find out that they say, okay, they are equal, but then we look on number indicators and find out that they are not equal. And that's why when we constructed this index, we explicitly stated that we put equal weights on all 4 dimensions, because they have intrinsic value, and we cannot say that environment is 2 times more important. So we did this. In case of Ukraine, they are not doing this. They are running through some sort of very sophisticated principal component analysis and then come out with some weight, which in my mind is not so defendable. This strange thing about values, it's a very important question, and I think we could discuss it even later on, because it's exactly this. Will be cohorts, those stupid or those not those evil. Basically, we could try to return to this scheme, but it could be too complicated, because when you improve something, it has some positive and negative externalities. And this approach is quite interesting. Maybe we should look on it more, because country C is better than country A and B, but which between them is better, it's hard to say.
Okay, thank you. No comments? I have one general comment, or maybe suggestion. This scheme, this logic of the relationship between different levels, input, output, outcome, and impact. In my view, this is more about the description of the process and action. I'm not sure that we can quantify this and have it as an index. We were talking about establishing a sustainable development index. It's not just about data, but also the relationship, how you quantify it. So each of these arrows will require different algorithm, which needs to be somehow.
Well, it's some kind of systems dynamics.
It's system that, yes, it's a process. But the more you go into this, I think the less you will be able to make it comparable for all the countries. So it's question.
Actually,
so we always have the trade-off between the easy to communicate, simplicity, but also, and on the other hand, robustness and in-depth.
Actually, that's why our group push out social setup on the border, because we had the longest debate, and this is really important. If you're a farmer and you have a daughter, how affected your happiness? It very much depends where are you living. If you are living in India and your perspective is to feed this animal for 15 years while you kick her out of home, it make you unhappy. But if you live in the United States, it's completely different. But when we start looking at this, we cannot come out with one thing, how to measure this. And second, we can come out with clear scale to index. This situation is equal to 1, this situation is equal to 0. That's why we push this societal setup on the border to keep it in picture, but to remember that we, so far we cannot measure it.
But this also relates to other areas to certain extent.
Yes, but it will be very much affect how this links work. Because you could educate people, but if they don't value this education and they don't go to work, that scheme won't work. Okay. Basically, the societal setup is
20 minutes past 5. We are late for the lecture if you wanted to attend it. I suggest that we close for today. Thank you. We can continue discussing those issues on beer tonight or tomorrow.